The relationship between the U.S. federal government and the state of Texas is rather interesting, to say the least. There are many things to talk about when trying to explain this complex relationship. Some of the things we will discuss today that we need to take into consideration are the early history and some of the historic events that happened. We'll talk about current issues between the U.S. federal government and the state of Texas. We will discuss how they managed to cooperate with each other and the systems of government that they used. We'll look at the relationship's impact on federalism as a whole, and most importantly, the role that political culture plays in federalism. So with that being said, let's first talk about the history between the two. First major thing that happened, the first Texas state constitution was framed in 1845 as a part of the United States. It was based on the same common principles that the United States Constitution used, basically, so they kind of went hand in hand with each other. But then the issue started coming in the following decade. Texans felt a lack of support from the United States with their war against Mexico. Texans were vocal in their criticism of Washington for failing to protect the border with the war against Mexico and for not aiding them when fighting against the Indians on the frontier. Texans were upset that the United States wanted them to join their country so bad, but they weren't being protected how they should have been. So in the following years came issues of slavery and the Civil War. Texans depended heavily on slavery for agricultural production, as did many of the other southern states. But the United States and the northern states didn't seem to care or really grant the southern states' wishes, and this caused the Civil War to happen. So Texas seceded in 1861 and joined the Confederacy. After the Civil War ended, they rejoined the United States in 1870. But for many years to follow, slavery, race, and segregation were major issues in the United States and in Texas. So now let's talk about the current issues. We'll look at 4 major lawsuit cases that happened, that are currently happening and happened. The lawsuit case regarding the voter ID law was filed in 2012. Texas sued the Department of Justice and wanted approval of its law to require voters to provide a photo ID when voting at the polls. This case ended up being withdrawn, and Texas lost money because of it, and they didn't get what they want. When talking about Obama's executive order, it was filed in 2014. Obama wanted to grant deportation relief for 5 million undocumented immigrants. Texas and 24 other states disagreed with this, and they ended up winning the case. So Obama's executive order did not go through. Briefly discussing the cross-state air pollution rule. Texas sued the EPA over regulations addressing drifting pollution from the state of Texas to other states, and Texas ended up losing this case. The Women's Health Program is a major case. It was filed in 2012. Texas sued the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services because of which refused to fund the state's women's health program because of a Texas law that prohibits state dollars from going to groups affiliated with abortion providers. So Texas ended up having to withdraw the case, and they chose to use state funds to support this program, so money coming out of their own pocket. But let's talk about how the government works together and how they cooperate. The American system of government today is predominantly characterized by cooperative federalism. This is also known as marble cake federalism, which is when national and state governments work together to provide services for local governments, state governments, and federal governments efficiently. This now lives on through fiscal federalism by using the system of transferring payments from the national government to the lower levels of the government. And lastly, I'd like to discuss political culture and the role that it has in federalism. Political culture is basically everything. It's all the citizens that make up the United States. It's all their beliefs, what they care about, and what they make up. And so it's huge when the federal government listens to the people, because that's what's happening. So when talking about federalism, political culture can be defined as the underlying values that affect the processes each level of government uses to adopt certain policies, including who can participate in decision making and the acceptable forms of government that are taken. The effects of ethnic and religious influences are important in the creation of individualistic, moralistic, and traditionalistic subcultures throughout the United States. So basically, political culture is the federal government. It makes up the entire federal government and what the United States stands for. So in conclusion, everything we discussed describes the relationship between the U.S. federal government and the state of Texas. We talked about the historic events that happened, and we also discussed the major lawsuit cases that have gone on. And lastly, we discussed the political culture and how the U.S. government and federalism works. Thank you.